We've finally gotten to value. Everybody's favorite thing to get to. The reason why we hold off on value for so long is because we use so many of our other techniques as we move forward into value. Now we're going to make the full use of all those tools in your toolbox, including your compressed charcoal, your charcoal pencils, and your Conte crayon. So make sure you have all of those tools at the ready. I'm going to show you a couple of those different tools right now and how they look a little bit different on the page with a little bit of value scale practice using some nicer paper. This is a Stonehenge paper I have behind me set up on my easel. And I'll be drawing from life using a sphere, using the sphere on the stand. And I'm going to fast forward that drawing so you get an idea of how I develop value relationships throughout a longer drawing. Okay, here's my toolbox. You know, we've talked a lot about all our different tools. This is my toolbox. It's seen a lot of wear and tear, which I really appreciate. This is your compressed charcoal. This is your compressed charcoal. It's like a thick stick, I'm gonna put that down here. Compressed charcoal. Yours might be round, but it'll feel like oily in your hand, and it'll feel a lot different from the vine charcoal. It's like heavier and denser, right? You still want to have your vine ready. We always want to have our vine just for gesturing at the beginning of the drawing and for toning our paper. These are Conte crayons. These are Conte crayons. It came in a box of 4. They're called Conte crayons. This is compressed. See, everything's all mixed up in my box. I'm going to pull out a black piece of Conte crayon. All right, you can hear it. It sounds a little different because it's made out of a clay, whereas the compressed charcoal is made out of charcoal. You're going to want your erasers. Pink pearl. This used to be pink pearl. It used to be pink. You can see it on the end. And my Staedtler eraser. This used to be white. Okay. You're going to want your chamois. And at the end of the drawing, we'll be using a little bit of white chalk and a little bit of white Conte. Here you can see here. You want to save these to the end because when you're smudging, the white chalk will appear a little green and it will mess up your smudging. So you always want to save your white tools, including your white charcoal pencil, for the very end of your drawing when you're doing the detail. Okay, the other tools I'm going to have at the ready are my smudge sticks. If you smudge, you can smudge with your fingers and you can smudge with your chamois, but your fingers have oils. Your fingers have oil on them. And the oiliness of your fingers sometimes like bleed into your paper in a weird way. These smudge sticks, they're not oily. They're meant for smudging, and they also have like finer points to get into detail. And I'm also going to keep out my charcoal pencils and my my charcoal pencil sharpening device, which for me is my X-Acto knife. For you, it might be something more like a pencil sharpener. Okay, so these are the tools I'm going to use. Okay, here I am with my sheet of paper. I'm going to do a little bit of a value test with my charcoal pencil. This one is hard. I'm doing a little cross hatching in the corner. It says hard. This one is soft, so I'll do a little cross hatching so you get an idea of what they smudge like. The soft will be smudgier. Okay, and the farther apart your cross hatches get, the less dense your value will be. And then I'm going to do this Primo one. This one is soft. I think this is also soft, and I'll just do some hatching. Okay. Then I have my vine. This paper, the nicer your paper is, the different, it will hold the material differently. And when I smudge some more of these, I'll pull the camera in closer so you can get an idea. So this is the Conte. They all have a little bit of a different vibe to them. You can also use the flat of the tool. When you're creating your value scales, you want to aim for as black as possible on one edge to as light as possible on the other. Conte. All right, now I'm going to do my compressed. I'm doing this so you get an idea of the different materials. Okay, now I'm gonna zoom in with you. All right, so here's the hard charcoal pencil. You can see it has less contrast from my soft versus this 59B, which is a little bit more roughness. This is my Vine. This is the Conti. It's a little oilier and it doesn't smudge as easily as my compressed charcoal. This is very hard to erase. Watch what happens when I erase it. Let's try and erase just through the drawing. Wow, you can really see that there's a little mark left here compared to where the Vine was, and it erased totally cleanly. Now another thing I want you to see is like, so here's my finger smudging. Now here's a smudge stick. See, it smudges much more evenly and really works that material into the page. You're gonna start to see how these different things, and the hard charcoal smudges the least. All right, so this gives you a little bit of an idea of how these materials will act on your page. And that's the whole point of those value scales. So I can even work that value scale a little bit more with my chamois, right? You're gonna use some kind of combination of all of these tools on your drawing. But ideally, you want a range of values from the white of the page, and actually even whiter, to a mid-tone, to a very, very dark, because you want to show contrast on your page. Okay, so value is just areas of light and dark within a drawing is distinguished from lines, but you can create value using lines. And I'm going to get into some more of this vocab as we keep going. I just wanted you to get a different idea of what this looks like. And with these value drawings, you're always going to want to use nicer paper because they'll hold on to the value with more tooth, and you'll be able to erase more deeply. Here I go, I'm going to erase the Conti. I'm going to erase all of this actually. You can erase more deeply than you ever could with a newsprint or with cheaper paper. As hard as I can erase, look at what's still stuck. Okay, look at what's still stuck. I can probably erase out all of my Vine, but the Conti and the compressed charcoal and all the charcoal pencils, there's still evidence of that on the page. This is really important. This is why we gesture with Vine. So understanding the value scale. This is a value scale that shows all the different, the bare minimum of values you want in each of your value drawings. There's the highlight, the light tone, the mid tone, the reflected light, the shadow, the core shadow, and the cast shadow. And you can see on the right the object that I'm observing when I'm drawing. You'll also see me talk a little bit. I'm recording a voiceover in order to speed up my drawing. This actual drawing took me about an hour. What I'm doing first is gesturing my sphere. You can see me creating a lot of different lines in order to get at a sphere. I'm not expecting you to draw a perfect sphere in your first go around. And I'm also using what we are practicing in our cylindrical perspective drawing right now, drawing through the sphere in multiple directions. You always want to start out your drawings with a gesture. And I decided to make my sphere a lot larger on the page. And in doing so, I'm starting to tone my page. Toning your page is adding a large flat area of value onto your page, which is like a medium tone. And you do this by using the flat of your tool to add some media onto your page and work it into the paper. You always want to use nice paper for gesture drawing, so you can work the material in and erase more deeply than you can with your newsprint. That's why we're going to be moving to using mainly nicer papers in class and for your practices. So I've created a nice medium tone, and I'm gesturing in my sphere a lot larger here. Look how much larger I made it. And I'm kind of honing away at the sphere. I'm getting at the shape of the sphere, and I'm blocking in big areas of value while considering where the light source is coming from, which is to the right and above. You always want to emphasize that right hand light source in this case, or wherever the light is coming from. It's very common sense. You always want to emphasize that when you're blocking in your major areas of value. This is called grouping values, where at the beginning of the drawing you want to preserve the whites on your page, which is your paper white, and you can see I'm working back in, I'm editing my drawing, I'm using my eraser, and I'm establishing value relationships. This doesn't work. Value drawings don't work unless you are putting value all over your page. Otherwise, there's nothing to show what a value is. Okay, so you have to make sure you're also, when you're working this, work your material into the page directionally. You can see me with my hand, moving my hand back and forth in a round form, not just straight across, in order to emphasize the form of the sphere. If you don't do this, you'll flatten out your objects. You can see, again, I put this in real time because it's very, very important. All right, now I'm going back and I'm erasing. I'm blocking my areas of white first because I don't want them to get too muddy. And then I'm going in and I'm going to pick up my compressed charcoal because that's really, really dark and hard to erase, in order to add some darker media and blend it into my lighter areas, right? You always want to blend from dark to light, not the opposite way. It's a lot harder to erase the whites, and you'll have to see me edit my shadow later in the drawing. So I'm going for my core shadow and my cast shadow, and you can refer back to that image for those terms. I'm going for the darkest dark and the lightest light, and then I'm going to blend in between them. This is me picking up my smudge stick, using my smudge stick to blend and to really create a nice even tone. And you see there's like a big gap between my lights, my medium tone of the page, the whites that I've erased onto the page, and my cast shadow. And now my job is to reconcile that. So I'm working, I'm honing my sphere, I'm erasing, I'm using my eraser, I'm getting closer to what it is I'm observing, and I'm preserving my areas of white, and I'm working that sphere, right? It's getting rounder and rounder the more I do, the more I look at it. What am I about to do next? I think I'm about to add some hatching and to create more tone on the page and start to see, look, I'm starting to blend and add a little bit more media, and then work back in on some tricky areas and smudge it and get that transition a bit more even. I also decided that my whites were too white. My sphere is gray. It's not a full white. So I added a little bit of media from my chamois. And then here I am, I'm hatching. I'm using hatching to add some areas of value there. Okay, I'm going to continue working the value onto the page, and I'm going to get a little bit closer in on what that looks like. And as I looked at that shadow, I think I realized that the shadow was the wrong shape. So I have to erase into it pretty deeply. And you can see the difference between the page and where I'm erasing, the difference between this and newsprint. And I also am noticing the edges of the shadow are very soft. So I want to make sure I'm smudging around and getting that soft edge of the shadow. And I think that helped make my sphere look a lot rounder, fixing the shadow. So the cast shadow is just as important as the object itself. And you want to know, like, is it touching? Is it right next to it? And I'm going back in and I'm working a little bit more white in, and I'm going to blend it back and kind of work back and forth. I'm working back and forth. And now I'm looking at the negative space around my sphere. I'm wanting to look at that negative space because it's really hard to draw an outline of a circle, and it's not impossible to do that perfectly. So you want to look at the negative space around your objects in order to define them. And I'm adding a lot of value behind it. And wow, you can see that value relationship has started to build up a great amount of roundness in my subject just by pulling my negative space in my background a tone darker. So I probably went from like a 4 to a 5 in terms of tone by adding that media. Yeah, I'm starting to emphasize those areas in that transition. It's kind of like the full moon, and adding all that darkness in the background. That's a term called chiaroscuro, which was used to create a sense of drama, a huge sense of drama, right? By having a very dark background where the lights kind of emerge. We'll be practicing that also in this unit with some drawing on black paper. So I'm adding some details here. I'm starting to make it seem a little bit more like fabric. I'm working it a little bit more. I'm feeling a little more satisfied with my tones, and I'm adding a bit of darkness to the fabric underneath the sphere. You can see you want your different tone, your different areas of tone to match, right? So like that is in shadow. It should be pretty dark and in shadow. And I noticed that and I started to correct that. If your areas of tone don't make sense all over the page, your grouping, your value grouping doesn't make any sense, your object won't have the right value, and it won't
visually make sense. So you always want to match the darkest darks and the lightest lights across the page, even if they're not touching, in order to achieve good contrast. So contrast is the degree between the lightest areas of the drawing and the darkest areas of drawing. And I'm going to probably like yell at you a lot and say, where's your contrast? Get some better contrast, erase into your page, get some nice contrast, because I think I'm personally drawn to high contrast drawings. If we're going to be working a lot in a dark room with a single light source, those are high contrast drawings, and that will help you see the value and develop that value and develop the value relationships all over your drawing. Now I'm picking up my white media. I'm at the end of my drawing. I've already done most of my smudging. I'm pulling in my white media on top to emphasize that shape and to really kind of hone that sphere, um, and add a little bit of that detail and the highlights and the reflected shadow. So I'm not, notice I did this at the very last moment of the drawing. You always want to wait to do that. And I was fiddling with the light, and you can kind of see when I put a harder light on it, the difference. Okay, yeah, I'm having some fun there with my light. So that's how you do a value drawing. And I'm continuing to work on it. And even looking at it now, I'm like, ooh, I need to fiddle with my sphere. But I know that you're going to have a great time with your value, and you're going to achieve strong value drawings throughout our practices.